everyone, I'm Catherine, the artist behind Bigelow Fine Arts. This is the final video in the candle series where I finish up the flames and small details at the bottom. How is your color progressing at this point? If you are just tuning in and want to follow along from the beginning, you can find the previous videos in the playlist linked above. Otherwise, grab your pencils and join in with me. It doesn't matter where you start. I'm back to my polychromos for the final touches on the page, but I did need the luminance to finish blending the background into the flames. I looked at pictures of flames and realized that the way they were drawn and the way they actually look are two different things. So, working with the outlines I have been given, I began with a base of cream over most of the flame outline. I then took the cadmium orange and the cadmium red to create the darker part of the flame at the bottom. The red went in the center and the orange feathered it out from there to make the outline seem less harsh. I then used the cadmium yellow to add in shadows along the outlines and darkened things up just a little. I think on the other flames I added in shadows before the orange-red flames at the bottom. It doesn't really matter what order this gets worked up in. The base of the flame in one of the reference pictures I looked at seemed to have a blue tint to it. I tried to add that in and felt it just didn't work well with the rest of the flame, so I removed it and carried on with just the red and orange at the base of the flame. The blue didn't come off very well on the first flame, but I'm not going to worry about it. The wick needs to look charred, but I didn't want to go in with straight black. For such a small area, it likely doesn't matter how flat the color looks, but I chose to use the dark sepia with a layer of black on top, followed by more sepia to make sure everything was really filled in. I gave the flame a halo of the same cream before coming in with the background colors to blend the background lightly into the rest of the halo. I had brought the background a little close to the top of the flames in places, making it a challenge to smooth out the sharp transition, but I did manage to make it work. I did notice that as I worked the luminance into the halo, it didn't easily go over the area I had just covered with the polychromos. Now, if I had been using a heavier hand, it likely would have, but it was nice to see that a light hand didn't, and I could be a tiny bit sloppy and not have to worry about messing up the yellow halo with too much background. I worked up the background in much the same way I did on the previous video. I went in with a really light layer to establish where the background would be. Then I layered up along the sharp transition to smooth it out and create a gradient into the yellow surrounding the flames. I also had to do my best to match the existing background working with the various layers I had already established, but in the end I made it work with more layers. Now that I have the background blended into place, I went over the yellow with a light orange to tint it a little. I also blended the same orange into the background to tie them together. And I also used it to darken up the base of the flame, which in most of the pictures I looked at isn't even there the way this flame is. So I darkened it up a little to help it fade back a little. Except for the blue, which I didn't like, I worked up the other two flames in the exact same way, blending the background into the yellow halo and filling in the wick. I began with a base of cream over most of the flame outline. I then took the cadmium orange and the cadmium red to create the darker part of the flame at the bottom. The red went in the center and the orange feathered it out from there to make the outline seem less harsh. I then used the cadmium yellow to add in shadows along the outlines and darkened things up just a little. I gave the flame a halo of the same cream before coming in with the background colors to blend the background lightly into the rest of the halo. The bottom of the picture did have me stumped as to what to do. I didn't want the sand to be the same color as everything else, but neither did I want something drastically different that would stand out from the rest of the image. I settled on using a raw umber for the base and the burnt sienna on top for the shadows that would be cast by the wax mounds. I did color the rocks as wax bits and tried to give them a tiny shadow. They are really small, but add in a nice detail. As an extra layer on the non-shadowed side of the sand, I went over with a layer of the cream to give it a shine from the rising or setting sun. The camels are shaded with the burnt sienna, filled in with raw umber, and also get some walnut brown for the saddle. I noticed there was no girth strap. I was tempted to put one in, but didn't. And finally the people. I really wasn't sure what to do with them. Every color that I thought would be perfectly acceptable either seemed too bright and would stand out, or would have them fading into the building and not be visible. I opted to go with the warm gray 6 and a walnut brown on top. I also used the walnut brown on the heads with some cream to lighten up the color a little. There are no faces, so this can either be hair or face color. They do blend into the picture, but they also stand out from the buildings and wax mounds too. I thought about going with bright red or bright orange. I even thought of using magenta, all of which would have been great choices, but in my mind the people are secondary to the picture and not a focal point of it, so I wanted them to be more muted. And they were also in the shadow of the buildings, so anything they would be wearing would be desaturated from the dark shadows. So I chose a dark color, and I'm happy with it. As it's your picture, you choose whichever color you think would match the best. This is it for the candles page in World Within Worlds. Stay tuned for my next project in this book. I'm going to be jumping around in this book unlike Enchanted Forest, so go ahead and leave your page suggestions below. If you've been following along, let me know. I'd love to see how your candles turned out. I'm on Instagram where I post infrequently and Twitter where I post slightly more frequently. If you have any questions or page requests, please leave them below or on the Patreon post linking this video, as well as on Twitter or Instagram. I have all the links below. I put in a list of chapter breaks in the show notes, as well as a list of equipment I have or will be using. If you use any of the affiliate links, it really helps me out without costing you a thing. I really want to thank you all for coming along and joining in with me on this coloring journey. I appreciate all my subscribers and look forward to more of you joining in and coloring along with me. That will only happen if you like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, happy coloring.